Hello. Okay, there we go. Well, hi, everyone who is gathered, and if others join us, that is great. And this will also be on YouTube. Hello to our friends who are there as well. Welcome to our final session tonight, part 3 of 3, connected with also our faith and justice gathering that we did on faith and fake news. So thank you for being here. And as we gather, I'll pause, and if you will pause with me, and we can pray as we continue. God, we think about how through human history, we as a people have been a people of story. And you have joined us in the midst of our stories. Sometimes we tell stories that are partial or stories that we want to believe. God, I pray that by your Spirit, you would help us to tell and to hear and to cultivate space for stories that are grounded in truth and love and justice. Stories that help us to see ourselves as participating in your kingdom, and stories that help us all to help your kingdom to come here on earth as it is in heaven. God, in the midst of this time, and in just a new way, where there exist people who intentionally and sometimes we unintentionally tell stories that obscure or hide or cover up. Pray that you would help us as a people, both individually and corporately, to develop capacities to discern. Capacities to invite and challenge and at times regulate in order to help us to be a people who tell stories and live stories that are more honest. So for these gathered and for your continued presence in the story of our lives, we give you thanks. In your name, amen. Well, I'm excited to be here with you tonight for this final session. In no small part because of a part of my own history that not very many of you know about, which is that in another lifetime, and if I had been born maybe as a different gender or sex, and if I had been born 50 years earlier, I would have been a journalist. That is absolutely one of the careers I deeply considered. I have a profound fondness for those muckrakers of old, which did include some women, right, who helped in the United States to expose, for instance, the injustice of the meatpacking industry in Chicago, right? Folks who expose the underbellies of organized crime in our cities, who told stories that helped us to live more justly. So I have long since, like literally since I was a kid, my grandma had a typewriter at our house, and that was one of the things I would play, was that I was a journalist, and I was always a crusading journalist, right? In that best of that legacy. Now that over time actually evolved for me, where up until college, it became pretty clear when I was in college that the future of journalism, as even my professors and people had known it was going to radically be different. And so it was very clear to me that that was not a career that seemed stable. So instead, I picked the other two most stable professions to choose. One is higher education, which is profoundly stable. It's a disaster right now. And the church, which there's no no rupture or disruption in church life or anything like that. But here we are. So I am profoundly grateful, have been deeply shaped by, and a deep believer in, for instance, some of you will have lived through or may recall how Watergate got broken open, right? That was through reporting, right? So for me, I think I've also been a person who I took seriously my communications. I'm a communications undergrad, in case you didn't know that. My professors who at the University of Minnesota, Duluth, who talked about the vital role, the fourth element of a healthy democracy. You know, you have the judiciary, you have the Senate, the House, you have the presidential, and you have journalism. And that is a way to help, like that's in my classes, especially one of my professors. She was a crusader for the importance of the fourth establishment of the state and the importance of the role of journalism. And so it's a fun thing to get to now bring together in this time with all of us, this conversation about faith and news, and how do we navigate it. So welcome back. And tonight we're going to be covering what I was thinking we'll do is for the first 30 minutes, do a little bit more of grounding ourselves in the third part of the book and have some conversations around a couple threads from that. And then in the last half, I actually want to go a little bit deeper because I think it's not just fake news, but kind of continuing to delve in a little bit more about as Christians, as people of faith in the world, what are the capacities, what are the obligations, the call of us as people of faith as we engage holistically, not just with, oh, is that fake, is that a lie or truth, but being able to continue to discern whose stories being told, what stories are being told, and what does our faith ask of us in that? So just kind of, we'll go there as we're ending. So coming into tonight then, part 3, and I'll just re-ground us a little bit in where we've been. So chapters 1 through 3 was really, she's seeking to help us understand the big picture and learning more about the landscape and, just outlining, here's what we're talking about, here's different sources, different considerations. And then chapters 4 and 5, if you were here, you may recall Christian saying, the chapter that all of those other people need to read and or ourselves might be chapter 5. And that's about how to evaluate informations and ways to think critically, also noticing our own emotions and what's going on with us. I don't know if you've ever had a moment, I know that I have, where I was about to share something that on my social media that I was like just outraged. I was like, this is the most terrible, atrocious, and anytime I'm like that big a feeling about it, I will pause and I'll be like, let me just check, where this is from. Like if it's what source, if it's not a source that I know that I've learned to trust over time, it might be that, right, it's suspicious. And in fact, I know of at least one instance for sure where I am so glad I checked because it was it was just not true at all. So she does that in chapters 4 and 5, noticing our own emotions. And then in this final section, it's really deciding what to do. And it's where she takes where do we go from here turn. So chapter 6 is all about seeking new perspectives. And I think noticing what perspectives we're drawn to, how are we limiting what we engage with. And she talks about the role and the importance of humility, particularly as a Christian virtue. And then how we hold the tension and being able to just continue to develop these capacities around realizing what lens we look through. So for instance, I'm very aware for myself that as I read news, as I consume it, as I think, as I post things, some of my core values that are operative for me, I'm deeply grounded in a belief in human rights. Right? Like equity rights is something that's a high value of mine, and I'm going to be paying attention to that. So as I can pay attention to that, or if I'm aware of what my political leanings are, I'm aware of different things, it helps me to be more reflective, about who's telling the story, what emotions are they trying to garner from me, what might be operative here, are there questions, et cetera. So she outlines that a little bit more, of naming the importance of that and continuing to find new perspectives and being open to listening to different perspectives too. So in some ways, this is a reiteration of things she said, in other places or things that you're like, yes, okay, that makes sense. So that's basically that chapter. There you go. Wrap that one up. So with that one, I'm wondering if you all would please, we're going to spend a few minutes. There's a couple different reflection questions at the end of this chapter. And I think what I would say is, who has books? Does anyone have books? Not really. Okay. We have at least one book in the room. So I'm going to give you 2 different question options and then either take one of them or go in a similar vein, to one of these. So the first question is something along the lines of, most of us, I'm assuming, have a normative source where we get news and information about local, excuse me, thank you, national, global news. When was the last time you engaged with a source outside of your kind of normative feeds? And or maybe at any point, did you have maybe a norm that you always went to these sources and you incorporated a new one? So have you looked at new ones or other sources, or even at times just checked, like, how is this one telling the story? Or so that's one option, kind of, have you sought out and or have you actually intentionally brought into your life other perspectives? So just as a for instance, I, a number of years ago, started subscribing to both, what's the major UK news? The Guardian, and Al Jazeera on my phone apps as ways of getting to sources that were outside of what had been my historic norm, and a way of kind of seeing how they were telling the stories and things that maybe I felt like in some of my US sources I wasn't getting enough global politics, and I wanted to get more global sources. So that was something where I incorporated some other sources into mine. So how about for you? And then another question option is kind of around the humility question. Like, as you're engaging with news and what you're taking in, what does humility, like, how is that shown up for you as a person who is both a consumer of news and then also a person who's thinking, and responding to that? How at all is humility function? So seeking out other perspectives, humility as a virtue in this reading of news life that we have, okay? So we'll take 5-7 minutes, come back together. Okay.
I'm not sure that's an issue. Most girls or guys don't listen to their parents anyway. No, I'm not sure. Parents used to have more interest or impact on.
Like 2 more minutes? How are you doing? 2 minutes?
I hope they're happy.
I'll invite whoever is sharing to wrap up, and we'll come back together in 30 seconds. Okay. We're going to come back to another round of questions. Okay, so you can, if I am forcing you into a pause that you don't really want, we'll come back and you'll get some more space to talk. So chapter 7 then is her final chapter, and it's on loving our neighbors, which seems very appropriate of a place to end, given the greatest commandment for Christians is to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And she is trying to help us wrestle with news as people of faith. So she now takes it to say, okay, what does neighbor even mean in view of news and who are our neighbors, and how do we wrestle with embodying this as people of faith as we're thinking about news? So one of the things she talks about in this is online relationships, and both like who are our online neighbors and how do we care for. I don't know if any of you noticed, or maybe you've had this experience if you're a social media user. where our skill sets and norms around how to engage on social media are something that we're more newly developing. And so, so even this is changed over time. I'm one of the earliest adopters of Facebook that you could be when they opened it up. And it was to find out what my brother was really doing, who was a few grades younger than I was how I originally got on. But I remember, the earlier days of when people would post political content and then they would argue, people would argue. And then you're like, I'm supposed to be related to you and I can't even, oh gosh, no, I just remembered. This actually is very close in our family. We had a major thing that happened on account of a post that an aunt saw. And it was a non-true post, and my spouse said that wasn't true, and then she called his mom, and then mom had talked to dad, who called Andy, and then Andy and his mom, and it was a thing, right? So how do we be online neighbors? What does it mean in the midst of news and life and relationships? How do we speak to one another? And this is new for all of us. Like, we haven't had to navigate digital platforms in this sort of way, where even as people have disagreed, right? Historically, we've had different sources of information, but this is it's a new frontier for us. And so she's, saying, okay, so what does this look like for us to be neighbors? How am I translating this ethic of neighbor love into the way that I also engage with people on social media around things, but then also, how do I care for or pay attention to how news is forming me to think about my neighbors, locally, globally, et cetera. So she invites us to think about that. Her encouragement is in this space for us to focus on relationships and to speak the truth and to be kind. So even as we are disagreeing, or if we have concerns about perspectives that someone might be sharing, instead of just posting the ever kind, wonderful, well, you're an idiot, or things like that. She's trying to encourage us for some other ways of being. So on your tables, I included a handout that's in the book. For those of you who are watching online, you could just Google how to speak up without starting a shutdown, and it will link right to this, and there is a PDF that you can access. And so this is, even you think of Courageous Conversations or those sorts of tools or resources, this is her trying to say, hey, sometimes we just need some resources for how to actually be, to engage with one another. And I think for her, fundamentally, she is, again, trying to get us to think about this as people of faith and how we're engaging. So that's, she goes there, and then in her conclusion, she leaves us with a blessing and some more reflection questions. I think the question that I want to then give back to you as we come up to the top of the hour, when we'll then take a turn, the question I want to say to you is, if you've been here for the 3 sessions or one of them, you're at least here for one, and or if you were at the Faith and Fake News conversation with the author, are there any takeaways or things that have been helpful for you as you've been thinking or wrestling, or things that you want to keep exploring? As particularly, we're moving into a season that, it's going to be rough, right? Like, this is going to be a hard time. How do we navigate this space as people of faith without, just completely disengaging from the world, and do so in a way that's grounded and also shows up in with love and discernment? So any takeaways or things that that you want to explore next in conversation with what's either been shared about the book or what you read? So just take some time and share with one another, and then we'll come back together. Okay, so probably 5-7 minutes. We'll take another about minute and a half, and then I'm going to come around with the mic and see, just to see, let it give us an opportunity to hear from one another, any takeaways that we have. Okay, I'll invite whoever is sharing to wrap up, and I'm going to come around with a mic and see if there's any takeaways from the sessions and the book that you would want to share, name to the broader group, and it may be something someone else shared.
Well, this is my own personal feeling, but I went down through this 1, 2, 3. I think these are all good. 4, I came to a screeching halt. And that's...
You're talking about the handout from tonight?
And
Lay out the facts?
Yeah, and because, there are alternate facts, there are perceived facts, and the truth may not have anything to do with the facts that you see them, as you see them. And so I think that is a hard one to get by. I have friends that are really think differently from myself, and I can read the Declaration of Independence to them or the Lincoln Address, and they won't agree with it because it's not factual to them.
Thanks for sharing that. We're gonna in the last probably 15 minutes, that truthiness is one of the categories I want to come back to. Okay. So thanks for that.
And the other thing I think that Rachel said last week, that it's okay to walk away from a disagreement. And I think that's something that I've got to learn. I don't have to be right.
Thank you. Thanks. Go ahead.
No, share your story.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Well, I just decided I had been really involved in politics and active, and I at one point, after having many debates and discussions, decided there's more to life than politics, and I want to connect with people. So I'm going to get, if it turns to politics, just say, I don't agree. And then try to talk about something else, where you find some common ground. You kind of find things out. They can teach you something. I had this experience of being in the Southwest, and there's in Tombstone and at this big bar, and so one guy is holding up the wall and is talking to another guy here, and they're talking politics, and I just said, I don't agree, and then tried to change the conversation. And we had beers together, and I bought a big basket of onion rings. And the guy, when I was going to leave, he says, you can come back anytime. So I think the idea is that you find, instead of going right into the snake pit, how about, backing off and trying to find, because this is a God creation person. This is a precious being. There's something really wonderful in this person. If we can get out of this kind of, I'd say, the snake pit has been built to monetize, so it's not in our interest. It's a way for people to make money. The more we fight, each other. So it's find another path, another way.
How about over here? Any takeaways from the book or the gatherings that you would want to share with the rest of the gather group? And it's okay if you say.
Well, we just talked a lot about the relationships are more important than the disagreements. And, finding common ground, absolutely. I think one of the things I just keep learning as a human being is that everybody just needs to be heard. And so even if I'm not happy with what they're saying, is giving them some time to just verbalize a little bit and not fighting back right away and well, but none of that seems to be very helpful. But truly, just relationship, we have relatives that are at different places and some thinking than we are, but the relationship is way more important than that. And they also know that the core of who we are, and I know the core of who they are. And I love Jan's, we're all God's people, and we're all leaning our ears up to him to hear what he wants us to be and how he wants us to be in this world. And so Ann and I are kind of chicken because we're not very confrontational, but we're really good listeners.
I appreciate the second part of that clause. I disagree with the first, just for the record of chicken. Wanting to be listeners. And I think, she said this in the book too, like, what's the role of, and as I said in the one chapter, what's the role of humility and loving kindness? And when are, Jan, I think, because I want to come back because it's interesting, some of the threads here, but when you think about, again, if part of because you're actually talking about relationships, right? And if part of it, so we're talking about discernment also about fake news and how do we engage. But if one of the ethical tasks of a Christian, or one of the ethical obligations, I would say, is that as I engage around conversation and relationships around both what are the facts, what is the news, what is going on, what is my call and obligation to my siblings, to all people, to honor the image of God in them as we disagree, right? Because to some of what you're saying about the monetizing, it's like designed for me to dehumanize you in the disagreement. And that's an important thing. How do I, to what she talked about in chapter 5, how do I get my breath back? Which is, again, spirit is breath, so that even as I'm radically and strongly disagreeing, or if I'm engaging with that, or if I'm saying, no, the truthiness of this matters, that doesn't mean I just get to say, oh, you're now non-human, and I, hope you get excised off the planet, or something like that. That's probably not very Christian. Yeah. Okay. Anything else from your table you want to say? How about you all? Anything, takeaways from the book or her lecture, or anything that you want to share for the edification of the whole?
I probably learned some things in reading these phrases here because Deb and I have completely opposite opinions on a number of things, and so some of these approaches would be good, especially for me to use rather than continuing the disagreement. So anyway.
How about you all?
I'd like to add to Dale's comment about facts. I had a friend that during the George Floyd thing and our name change, we were on different sides and traded emails a couple times, and we said, hey, this is silly. Let's just get together and talk it out. And I'll share my thoughts and you share yours. And we, I don't know, had coffee maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times and got absolutely nowhere. She was very nice. I mean, we were both respectful and whatever, but it ended up she had her facts and I had my facts. And we maybe didn't take the time to get into those facts, but I don't think that would have really helped. In something then kind of missed in the relationship. I mean, we were still friends, still nice and whatever, but the relationship just wasn't the same because we didn't agree on the facts. So laying out the facts depends who's laying them out.
Anything else from your table? Yeah.
Well, I said that I learned a lot because I'm not involved in a lot of news or social media. So I learned a lot. I have a friend who has a lot of different ideas and really buys into a lot of conspiracy theories, and in my opinion, is way out there on multiple things. And she's just a very dear friend, and will come and kind of hammer me with some things about, you need to get 30 candles because there's 30 days until this happens. I'll sell you the candle, and we're very good friends with long term. And so I'll say, I can tell that is so important to you. And that's a phrase that's been very helpful, where I just say, that I can tell that is very important to you, and you are a dear to share this with me and care about it, but I don't think that, so I won't take you up on your offer, but thank you. But that phrase is, I can tell that's really important to you, has been important, And she loves me, and she just said, I am so sorry for your ignorance. And to which I say, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you that you care so much about me. So.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Did you want? No. Okay. So I just want to know, I'm very struck by all of the comments were about relationships, right? And what to do in a world where, what to do in our current time, and how to navigate relationships in view of the reality that there are very vocal sources of information that are telling us things that are not actually congruent or even possible to exist at the same time sometimes, right? Like they both actually can't be true. So I think that that just really strikes me. I just want to kind of pin that to us to say, hey, I know some of you have done work around courageous conversations, but it sounds like that might actually be something to encourage the adult ed team and Christian to think about as we head into fall, is to have some more space around courageous conversations and how to keep cultivating capacities around relationship and around disagreement, and how to lovingly embody our faith with one another. Because, and I hear it too, there's heart and there's pain and there's longing and there's, in all the things you're saying too. And that's important. That's a really big thing. So I just want to name that I clearly heard you all say that. And so I think that sounds like a really important and worthwhile thing that we're all longing for some more skills and support, right? And it will probably be acute this fall. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I think that that's not a very far limb to say. So I want to bring us back to a couple things though, in view of the text and around news and sources of information. Some of you may recall a famous story from what happened in Halloween of 1938. I don't believe that there is a one of you who is actually, you probably know the story, but I don't think there is a one of you who has a memory from your embodied experience. There's no one here who that would be true for. But you may have learned about it or heard, and yeah. So what happened is in 1938, the days of the radio, CBS Radio Network aired a play adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Some of you may recall this story. The play was formatted like a real radio news broadcast. It started with the weather, a performance by an orchestra, and then there were reports of explosions on Mars that would occasionally interrupt this performance. Half an hour in, there's an emergency bulletin that comes on the radio. Okay, this is CBS radio in everyone's homes who has one. And there's an emergency bulletin that a UFO has landed in New Jersey. Aliens have invaded Earth. Okay, there's a slaughter of people and police that's happening. And there's no doubt the newscaster is saying about who is going to win this war. So here's what happens, is that reports from the time, like people thought this was real, that this was an actual news broadcast of what was happening, that some people had heart attacks, threats of suicide, shock, like there was a profound impact. And this is one of the things I'll point to in the story about fake news, about a time when truly the way that shaped people's experiences and realities, and that this matters. Right. And this is where I think about my, and I'm going to find her email and send her, I'm sure she's retired now, but my college professor for the course Deciding What's News, Deborah Peterson Perlman. In the course, and it was actually in the spring of 2003, which some of you may recall was the invasion of Baghdad by the United States during the Second Iraq War. And we had to pick a news story at the beginning of the course that we thought we could follow throughout the semester, looking at variations of news sources, like all different kinds, print, online, radio of all variations, and track how they told the story. So I picked this story that who knew what it was going to be, and it ended up becoming the major story, which was the invasion of Baghdad. In that course as well, I did my final project on media conglomeration. And I regret deeply, because it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever created, I traced it. And back in 2003, Rupert Murdoch owned half of the world of news outlets. And one of the things we talked about was the ethics of who owns what, and how does that impact what stories get told and how they get told, et cetera. As she said in that class, the news serves as an important gatekeeper. It does, this was her quote. I have other thoughts about it, but it doesn't tell us what to think, but what to think about. Now, I heard some of you referencing Walter Cronkite, So one of the truths of when, and even as I was growing up, right, we had CBS, ABC, NBC, nightly news, and even as we had our different politics and perspectives, et cetera, the general population of the United States had a set of agreed upon, here is what is going on, right? And there was, to various pretty large extents, a sense of, as the media, we understand ourselves as the fourth estate to preserve democracy and or public order, which sometimes meant then certain stories got scrubbed and erased. So for instance, I didn't know there was a civil war in El Salvador when I was growing up until after the fact, because intentionally the New York Times and other establishments didn't tell the story because of U.S. politics in the global South and concerns about Russia, USSR at the time, right? So uprisings that were happening in South America were not featured in big print in the US media in the 80s, et cetera. But broadly, the sense of we had common stories. Hey, this is happening, here's what's going on. And even as we would interpret them differently based off of our perspectives, that content overlapped. Now, of course, there's been a proliferation of really varied sources. And then we have social media, the web, and there's so many different ways of telling the story. I think about this even in terms of the two different moments of my own life. One was when I was in college or seminary, and there had been the Hurricane Katrina, and I couldn't find anything on the TV about Hurricane Katrina. I was hearing that people were stuck and stranded in New Orleans, but on none of the typical news shows, they weren't showing anything. And the only thing they showed, if they showed anything, was people, of course, who were black, who were stealing things from the storefronts. And so that was when I became an NPR listener. because they were the only people who were broadcasting from like the ground during Katrina, right? And, how that shaped what I began to think about for myself versus if I was only watching the TV, I was only seeing a particular thing. A more recent example would be, so I am an avid social media user, and since the most current violence and conflict between Gaza and the Palestinians and Israel, there is a lot of stuff on my social media feeds and in my media stories, particularly from Palestinians, people who are living in Gaza right now, and I'm seeing and getting in my feed a lot into whatever our feeds are, right? So all of my friends are posting all of this, these stories, versus, if that's not where you're getting your, like the conversation or the source of information about what's going on, it's gonna impact how you think about what's happening, how you're making sense of it, et cetera. And so like, I'm watching all this stuff being posted and I'm like, hey, Biden administration, you need to help the young people who are getting all their news from TikTok to understand why you're making the global policy decisions that you are, because they're clearly not buying it, as we're seeing increasing uprisings at college campuses, et cetera. But this is where we're getting our news from these different sources, and how do we develop capacities to be able to then be reflective and keep breathing and notice what's going on within ourselves. And to some, I've heard Christian talk about this, you all have talked about it, and being able to think about, in an age of increasing media conglomeration and the suspicion that we see in public culture around media as an important corrective or support for a flourishing democracy, when that becomes suspect, who wins? Who wins when truth is no longer a category? Who wins when we say, oh, well, I don't know what to believe, so I throw up my hands? And so just a few thoughts, and this is my thoughts, okay? In case you didn't think these were my thoughts so far, I just want to come back to, okay, I'm the elder millennial in the room, and I just want to say truth is a category. Perspectives are real, right? We can have different experiences, but I do think it's important for us to continue to wrestle with truth as a category. And that, while I can have my own experience of things, and I mean, even to what I think you beautifully shared, like, it can still be like, someone can be like, the Declaration of Independence is not real. Okay, I'm not gonna change that person's mind, sure, I'm not, but I'm gonna refuse to cede the ground of like, okay, however you wanna name what happened with George Floyd, the reality is George Floyd is dead, okay? That's true. Like, so when someone starts to say, oh, the Holocaust never happened, nope, actually, I'm not gonna cede that territory. That is a thing that happened. Like, was there an uprising at the Capitol? Yes. How do you make sense of it? What's your perspective on what was going on in it? Was it unjust? Was it outside of the law? Should it be prosecuted? Those are different questions. Now, if someone's like, well, January 6th just didn't happen. I mean, I'm kind of with you. I'm just not going to argue with you on that. I'm going to be like, no. Okay, I mean, but I'm not going to argue with that. But I think it is important, and you've heard me use this example before, for Christian people, I do not think it is an option to say about migrants, they should just die in the desert, right? Like the reality that there are people who put water in the desert to help to support migrants so they don't die on their journey, and other people go in and cut the water things, like, not cool. Whatever your perspective is on migration and borders, et cetera, you can have a really rigid perspective about border enforcement and still be grounded in a fundamental, necessary Christian conviction that all people are made in the image of God. So I want to encourage us that I do think truth is a category. Please don't cede truth as a category, even as we recognize all of our perspectives are partial. They're all situated in particular places. We all have biases, and we all have perspectives, right? That's just true. And hopefully, we can wrestle with one another with loving kindness, with curiosity, with the fruits of the Spirit, with spirit breath. And sometimes we just don't wrestle, right? Sometimes we're just like, let's just take a minute and, go breathe and stuff. But I just want to affirm, I think truth is a category, as is the reality that we are all situated within perspectives. And so I hope as we're engaging with news, that we refuse to see truth as a category, and we seek to be people who tell stories that are rooted in truth. We are people who are rooted in a story that says God was embodied on earth and God rose. There are claims in that. I think that's something that I would continue to encourage us is truth is a category. We're all situated in perspectives. That's part of being human. And so then what is the role of the spirit and breath as we're engaging with news sources? Because, right, sometimes you can find you go down a rabbit hole and suddenly, everything is terrible and awful and there's literally no hope left anywhere. That's a good moment to take a step back and go serve or go love on some grandbabies or, go bake something for somebody. And what is the call in view of what I am learning about the world? I think there are times we need to take a step back. None of us are Jesus. We can't save the world. We can't fix everything. But I do think that would encourage us to say that there is some level of responsibility that we have as Christians to also engage in what is happening around us. Because that is part of the call to care for our neighbors. And to do that with wisdom and discernment and care and all of the things. And so that sense of both I still am called out and how do I remain prayerful and discerning as I read, as I'm noticing things. So for instance, I will just say I try to practice this myself. I'm a pretty avid consumer of news. In various forms and ways of reading. But sometimes I'll read something and I try to remain prayerful and critically reflective and noticing what's going on in me when I'm yeah, or when I'm done with those people or, those sorts of moments, but I remember there was this thing that happened on Capitol Hill. And I'm and it was people with whom I generally, have some overlap of perspectives. And I was this is such a political stunt, people. Being able to be reflective about how people I might have some resonance with. Can I remain critically reflective about that and thoughtful? So I think that's just kind of as you're thinking about truth and fake news, I think it's also looking at, it's not just that easy of categories, right? But it's being able to notice, these are the journalists even who we have who are paid on staff, they're overworked and the newsrooms keep getting cut. So how do I also remain a critically reflective, a person who's engaging and noticing what is the perspective that seems to be coming up in this article? Whose voices are missing? Who's the victor? I overheard you say something about whose perspective is this being told from right now? Those sorts of capacities and then maintaining my own humility and prayerfulness as I'm reading and asking, okay, what is God inviting me into? What's the Spirit up to as I'm learning about this thing? What's the call? And so I hope those are things we can keep wrestling with as people of faith. And fundamentally, our God, as I started off, and I didn't mean to start there actually, but I started off with my opening prayer that this God is a God of story and has been present in our stories and is present in the story of human history. And news is a way of also telling the story of people locally and globally, et cetera. And I think God does care about it, So anyway, so I continue to pray. I pray for a lot of things, but one of the things I pray for is I pray for the leaders and people who have more access to controlling the news sources and more money than I do, that they will have revivals of spirit so that they will believe that truth is a category and they will seek to be just and earnest and for the flourishing of humans and democracy and all of the things. Like, this is actually, I pray this a lot. I don't think, they say the prayers of a righteous person are powerful and effective, so I need more of you, I think, to, join me in that prayer. But, I think that is, it matters, who's telling the stories and how these happen. So, may we continue to seek truth. May we continue to seek the good of our neighbors, and may we continue to love God and love our neighbors as ourselves. And I hope also we'll keep exploring how do we love each other and love our neighbors in the midst of our wrestling and struggling to be human together in this time. So thank you so much for engaging with this book and conversation. Next week, there is a gathering around, we're having a marriage and family therapist, and it's focused on really, I think, caring for anxiety and other mental health struggles that our kids and youth are facing. So if you'd like to join us for that conversation, that will be happening next week. And then I don't remember what's happening the week after. And then there's the end of the year fundraiser party thing for Wednesday nights. Does someone know what's happening the week after next? Am I missing a week? That's on the 15th. There's something on the 8th. There will be a Wednesday night program on the 8th, and I cannot recall what it is, and I'm sorry. Go then here. Let me just send with the blessing of that she had in her book here. This is from Colossians 3:12 through 17. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with one another and forgive each other if you have a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body we're called to peace. And be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell amongst you richly as you teach, admonish, read the news, that's not in the original version, one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, songs of the Spirit, singing to God, posting things on social media, and gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God through him. Amen. Thanks, everybody.